We're going to have Toddi Steelman, professor with the School of Environment and Sustainability and the former executive director, facilitate and moderate this session. So I'm going to call her up. I think she's made all the arrangements with the speakers and the panel members, and I'll turn it over to her to introduce the session.
Thank you very much, Gary. We get to bring it home here today with this last panel, and thank you all for hanging in there. We've had a really terrific day. It's been there's been a lot of terrific information, and I've learned a lot, at least so far today. We've got another amazing group of experts up here today to talk about IPP, independent power producers, and especially thinking through how does the policy and regulatory environment influence how we think about IPP. So I want to introduce our esteemed panel. I want to start basically with Tim Schuster. Tim, hold up your hand there so they know who you are, who has spent 17 years of his career in the energy industry with SaskPower. So we've got another SaskPower representative up here today. It includes 2 years as Director of Independent Power Producer Development, leading all aspects of IPP supply, including wind, solar, biomass, gas, and flare gas procurement projects. He holds a Bachelor of Administration from the U of S, yay, and an MBA from Athabasca University. So thanks very much for being with us here today, Tim. Our second speaker comes to us today from, is it ONEC? ONEC Group of Companies, Denis Wiart, and he's been a principal at ONEC since 2001, and he's currently CEO. He has over 24 years of experience in project management, engineering, and quality assurance. Denis' industry specialties include power generation projects, utilities, chemical, water, process system design, and ONEC has partnerships with various First Nation corporations, both here in Saskatchewan and in the Northwest Territories, and I'm hopeful he can talk to us a little bit today about those partnerships and how those have come to be and what his experience has been with those. ONEC has been involved in several renewable projects, including solar, wind, biomass, and hydro, and have several in various stages of development. So he comes to us with a lot of experience here today, so thank you very much for being with us today. And then our third participant is Dwight Redden. Dwight is a Senior Director of Renewables and Products for ATCO, an electricity global business unit with responsibility to advance clean energy projects and effective energy use. He has a degree in civil engineering from the University of Alberta. He's been with ATCO Group of companies for the past 30 years, including 10 years in business development. For ATCO's Independent Power Producers section. Dwight was also a general manager with overall responsibility for ATCO Electric's 3 north of 60 regulated utility companies in the Northwest Territories and in the Yukon, so he comes to us with a lot of northern experience as well. So thank you also, Dwight, for being with us today. So gentlemen, what I would like to do is open it up a little bit. We have the benefit of actually the panel before us having seen and heard everything that everybody else has already talked about. So I'd like to start with just a general question. What do you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges related to IPP in your given regions? And maybe we can start with Tim and go down and see how you would like to just sort of handle that particular question.
Okay. So opportunities for independent power producer development in Saskatchewan I think are very, very significant right now. Everywhere from small scale projects that you might be looking at to our large scale projects. Right now we've got a 200 megawatt wind competition out there that will be an IPP build. We're doing a solar project right now, our competition rather, for a 10 megawatt project, and we've got plans for a significant number of projects, kind of one after the other going forward here. So on the sort of the large scale IPP opportunities, there's certainly going to be a lot of opportunities coming up in our province. There's a significant number of eyes, if you will, in the IPP community that are very, very interested. I'm sure the same would go for Alberta, but Alberta, Saskatchewan have kind of become the focus of where the IPP opportunities are. And Ontario is built like there's not a big build going on there. Quebec, that sort of thing. So we've somewhat become the focus for where the IPP opportunities are on the big project side. In terms of smaller projects, so be it a geothermal project or flare gas project or name any technologies. We've got a lot of independent power producer that are looking at us, bringing us proposals for projects, bringing us different technologies, that sort of thing. So right now, just on the smaller scale, we're looking at 14 or 15 projects right now that we're actively evaluating those opportunities to see how they might fit with our system and to see if they would be a good fit for SaskPower. So kind of across the range of projects, in particular renewables, there's a lot of opportunities for us.
Great. Denis?
Great. Thank you, and I want to say thank you to Greg too for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here and speaking with everyone. For opportunities, ONEC, we're very interested in the community scale and industrial scale IPP opportunities in Saskatchewan. We see the province leading a pack in Western Canada with some of the recent tenders that have come out. Those are large scale. In particular, we're very interested in some of the learnings today from Alaska and the community scale size project for power. And I just see that it would be such an interesting model to build a framework around that and to encourage that in communities. We're an EPC provider. ONEC does those type of projects, so we'll work on the large industrial or the small. We just see a really good fit in that area. In Alberta, we're even in that 100 kilowatt scale where we're doing rooftop solar installations because that's about all that's kind of moving in that province at the moment. There's plans for some bigger projects, but there's a lot of smaller scale. But yeah, very interested and very big promoter of community scale systems.
Hello, and thank you very much for the invitation, Greg, and the whole team that put this event together, and being welcome to the Treaty 6 First Nation. That's very wonderful to be here. We're grateful for the opportunity, and we see so many opportunities in the IPP front, in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Alberta, and we generate, we transmit, we distribute, we do cogen projects, we do solar thermal district heat, we've got hydro capacity, we do large utility scale projects, but what's very exciting is that an IPP now can be any of us as an independent, a true independent, one person, one customer. And to see that the level of enthusiasm now that a large focus is on the renewable opportunities, how many people, how many communities, including Indigenous, our on-grid, off-grid customers want to be involved in electricity and energy. That's very exciting. The model of our customers as being just consumers, and I think, Clay, you talked about it, that model's different. They're what we're calling prosumers now, so you're producing and consuming and pulling energy in and energy out. How do you work with that? In some of our jurisdictions, it's net metering, net billing. You keep track of how much is going out, how much of your energy you offset, trying to look at a balance for that. And then the large scale projects, we're seeing interest in, like in Alberta, utility scale, solar, wind projects. We could probably talk about carbon later if anyone wants to talk about that. That's just exciting times from the opportunities of how we get to interact with the customers. We're interested in partnering. We want to bring our expertise, but we don't know it all either. The one community, if you've seen one grid, you've seen only one grid, and we are in 4 different systems at least, and then off-grid communities. We need the locals to help us understand how do they utilize energy, what can we do on conservation and demand-side management, and those interesting initiatives. So there's just been a lot of traction, and now we're getting the action in on achieving some pretty high targets of renewable penetration.
Great. Well, Dwight, I'm going to take your lead there about the carbon price question. And so if we do have carbon prices and we have to take those into consideration across your various regulatory environments, how does that affect the potential, or how does that create obstacles for moving forward? Would you like to go ahead and start with that?
Since I started it, I'll
Yeah,
go
sure.
first.
Toss it back to you.
Well, and it depends where we are. In some of our, say in the Alberta market where the wholesale price of electricity is quite low, we want to integrate renewables. But customers have an expectation that, hey, we're going to get renewables, but we don't want it to be a cost driver. In fact, we would like to see costs go down, our efficiencies go down or up, and be balanced that way. So in the meantime, you need some mechanisms then, and if you're going to use carbon then to stimulate renewable development, then there's a good purpose for it.
Yeah,
Denis,
no,
or-
I agree as well. I mean, nobody really likes a tax, an additional tax, but a carbon tax with a purpose. I mean, we all pay property taxes, and it's for a purpose. It's for, you know, roads and infrastructure. If the carbon tax is to encourage renewables, yeah, we're definitely all for that.
Okay, yeah, so I would somewhat concur with my colleagues there, like get carbon tax and that sort of thing, I think definitely will encourage renewables. You just have to do the arithmetic for what that does potentially for a wind project and does not do for a coal project, or we'll see where carbon tax goes, where natural gas is concerned in the future. But do you have to have it, or is it a must, in order to encourage renewables? I certainly don't think that it is. When you look at what's happening with solar nowadays, with it going so far down the cost curve, and continuously getting capital costs down, construction costs down, getting the overall cost of solar energy down, I mean, it's becoming more and more attractive all the time. Wind, you read or you hear about projects being put together that have a cost south of 6.5 cents a kilowatt, and there's going to be projects that do significantly better than that. The wind is getting to be one of the most cost-effective forms of generation that you could find. So, I think the carbon tax will help push things in that direction. But the renewables industry has come a long way towards just being a good common sense solution for generation in the future as well.
Great, thank you. Denis, we had talked before the panel started about ONEC's experience with a variety of partnerships, because you've done a lot of partnering already with a variety of First Nation corporations. So I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit about what you think goes into making a successful partnership and what your experience has been with these partnerships in Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories, places where you've been working.
Sure. Yeah, we're at ONEC. We're a big proponent of partnerships, combining a team approach where you combine local knowledge, local personnel with expertise brought in to do a project. We found it's very cost effective for the project, and it encourages the community engagement. It encourages employment. So if we're doing a project, we often integrate a training program. Let's say it's a community scale solar rooftop. We'll do a week-long training session, encourage solar installers. It's a 1-week course. It's really for assembly, but it gets the community engaged. And we've done that in Alberta to date. We're looking forward to doing it with our partnership with Star Blanket First Nation in Fort Capel. Excited to say we're soliciting projects, and we're open for business there to take on projects. And we're just finding a partnership is a way to create a long-term arrangement where you're sharing knowledge, building up capacity, basically creating a team.
Great. I don't know if either of you want to add anything to that in terms of your partnership philosophy, or if there's anything you would add to that.
Sure. I can talk a little bit to our partnership with First Nations Power Authority in the province here. So going back several years, we've had an arrangement with FNPA that's entirely aimed at getting generation projects going. So it's proving to be a very good partnership. We're certainly learning a lot. One of the keys to it is just understanding stakeholder interests. Like what are the interests of the First Nations that want to be involved? What are the interests of the communities where the projects might be going? And how can we work together to create win-win situations to provide those opportunities is really the key thing. But really good partnership opportunity we have with FNPA here.
Great. Dwight?
Yeah, and we're very grateful for the partnerships that we've had in communities and Indigenous First Nations in northern Canada for decades, as well as throughout Canada. We've got a group of sustainable communities that assists in development opportunities within the communities for customized, bundled solutions then that meet housing, workforce, schooling, programs and job mentorship type opportunities that then helps our projects get integrated, and our partnerships have been key in going, I guess, throughout all of our service areas. We also work internationally, and I would say partnerships are the key to being successful on all of these fronts.
Great, thank you. So all of you have been involved in, different type of project development around IPP and have done some really good thinking around this. What would it take? What are the next steps to really move the needle forward in terms of the next level? So what do you see as the inducements, or what do you see as the key barriers that have to be overcome to sort of get to the next level? How do we really move that needle forward? I'll let anybody pick that one up. Who wants to start?
I'll start with identifying the opportunities, the challenges that we will turn into opportunities. And there was a lot of good dialogue this morning on understanding what it means to systems and what are areas where people and communities can get involved. So it's the understanding of that. There's been a lot of research work done on it, the technology advancements, the economies now that are being realized in renewables, and people just being aware that the energy self-sufficiency and environmental sustainability opportunities that are out there. I think the word is traveling so rapidly. We're seeing such a high level of involvement and interest that it's almost the challenge is to keep up with it. And forums like this are so wonderful to get the information out, to develop the networks with each other and find out what our key areas and capabilities are so that we can weave those together. I think that's where we're at, and I think it's going to be a race to keep up with it. I think it's that exciting.
For sure.
I can take a swing at that next. I think something that would be helpful is just making sure we're all working together and that we have a good cooperative process. So when I say we, the utilities, the IPPs, the regulators, is there ways that we can facilitate the permitting process, for example, to make it a little bit more streamlined? It seems like, having been involved with a couple of gas projects and a pretty good window on the wind, that that side of it, the regulatory permitting side, seems to be getting more complicated and not less. So are there ways to facilitate some more streamlined processes there? I think having been around to a lot of communities in Saskatchewan, there's certainly a huge interest in the province in renewables, in solar, like whether it be the bigger projects we're talking about or for an acreage or Hatteri Colony, wherever it might be. There's a lot of interest out there. There's also a great opportunity to educate the folks that are out there about what renewable projects are all about. So what's a wind project? How does it work? How much land does it take? What happens at the end of a wind project to make sure that things are wound up properly, so that those communities are feeling that they're going to get a lot of benefit from these projects and that they're not incurring a lot of risk by having these new neighbors come into their neighborhood, sort of thing. So I think we can work together to open doors, certainly in Saskatchewan, create an atmosphere where the renewable projects are going to be welcome when we do go knocking and looking for opportunities.
Sure, I guess, to move the needle or to get projects going is and I'm in that world because it can be a challenge to get the projects going. some of the things that we'd like to see, and we see it in some in other provinces, other jurisdictions. The residential side, seems to be a fairly easy market to have enticed with in Saskatchewan 100 kilowatt program. Alberta has something similar, BC as well. Utility scale, there's another big jump to sort of the large scale projects. There's an RFP process. It's quite established, but there's a piece in the middle, that community piece, that more similar to what the Alaska gentlemen were talking about. It's how do you build that framework around that, the pricing. Is there a storage incentive for if they encourage their own in storage? I see that being a key thing to kind of break that whole market segment out, just to develop that framework pricing. Once we have a pricing model, then we can go get our partners can go get funding, and we can start the project. It's that kind of thing to get it to the next step.
Sure, so they're just different levels, and we've been talking about it kind of as one great big homogeneous thing.
Yeah,
and
but I see it as three
differentiation.
there is a residential, it's more, power savings, right? Community, it's, okay, benefiting the community and generating a, residual income for that community. Then utility is more providing it to the masses. I see it as three distinct markets. Yeah.
With their own opportunities and challenges, no doubt. Great. Excellent. So we've got representatives here from different provinces, and so those provinces have very different regulatory traditions. And so, in particular, Alberta and Saskatchewan are close to each other, but they just have very significant institutional and ownership differences. So I'm wondering, because maybe not everybody in the audience is familiar with what some of those differences are, can you give just a brief explanation of what you see as some of those differences and how those differences actually create opportunities or challenges, in the renewable energy and for IPPs in particular? Can you speak to that?
So we won't talk about the Yukon or Northwest Territories right now, or I'll go with
Yeah, no,
Alberta.
please do. I think it's all interesting.
So the territories that we operate in, regulated and based on a cost of service format then, where you basically open book, take a look at your operations, and you have the intervener involvement that looks at how the utilities are operating, and that's how sort of the revenues are set and the development plans are laid out and then followed up on. Alberta, it's regulated on the transmission distribution system, but it's a wholesale market on the energy side, so it is a bidding system. Power producers bid into the Alberta Electric System Operator then that decides how the units are going to be run. There's a change underway with that then for what we're calling a capacity market that is being developed now. So that process is happening, and there's stakeholder involvement and comments on that, and an expectation that sometime in 2018 then there'll be a capacity market then that would essentially incentivize capacity. So we love the renewables. Some of the renewables have storage, some firmness to them. A lot of them are energy displacement, so if it's solar or wind, then that energy displacement happens. If it's off, then you have to have some fitting curve that then backs it up, so some firm capacity. So this new market would be a way to say we're going to look after energy and we're going to look after capacity to make sure that the two of those are together and that you've got an entire system. And in Alberta, there's some pretty aggressive targets then. Government is looking at 30 by 30, so 30% of capacity by the year 2030, so about 5,000 megawatts, of renewable, and they're on that path now. There's renewable energy program and Alberta infrastructure looking for some solar farms and some proposals in on wind and hydro projects. So those timelines, I think the first ones that they're targeting would be about 2019 for commercial service. And that, so that market is very dynamic. as you're changing things, you don't want to cause the pause. You still have to keep moving and keep planning and integrate, I think, call it a basket of technologies and solutions that will ultimately be the Alberta interconnected system.
For sure.
That's probably enough if.
That's good. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, so Saskatchewan is quite a bit different than Alberta in a lot of respects. So SaskPower is still a fully integrated utility, so we do a lot of the generation, we do the transmission and the distribution, collect the money from the customers, plan the system, operate the system, everything like that, whereas Alberta, it's much more broken up into separate utilities, and I think on the transmission side as well. So it's a quite a bit different system. The way that we do, like, let's say the wind, for example, like my colleague there was talking about, like, creating a capacity market and creating some pricing mechanisms and that sort of thing, which will encourage, renewables in Alberta. In our case, what we do is we have the competition for the wind project, for example. The proponents bid a certain price that they need for it, and then we have a winner based on the pricing primarily, sort of thing. And then from there forward, it's just based on megawatts times the price that they've bid. So there's no need for a secondary market. There's no need for a renewable energy rec, which was, I think, will be the mechanism in Alberta. So our system, in some respects, is quite a bit simpler. We have quite good PPAs, so at other events that I've been at, our way of doing things has been referred to as a gold standard, so it's a really good PPA with a predictable revenue flow and that sort of thing. So that's, as far as moving forward, just at this point, our system is maybe a bit more conducive, a bit more ready as far as renewable development is concerned. I'm sure Alberta will catch up to us. Unlike in football, where they're falling further behind all the time.
Ouch. All right, the gauntlet has been thrown.
I better just shut up, I think, for 3 seconds. On the planning side, so the move to large-scale renewables, as we've heard from a number of people today, takes a pretty significant change. So you're having to back up a lot of renewables on the system, whereas before you didn't. There's the interprovincial opportunities now, like Manitoba's rich in hydro, we're going to be rich in wind and other renewables in Saskatchewan. Is there a natural fit that I don't think we've talked too much about today? Can we wheel power back and forth, that sort of thing, between provinces? Designing our grid in Saskatchewan, so we're going to have to get deep into things like geographic diversity, which is a fancy way of saying you can't put all your wind turbines in one location. They have to be spread out. So when the wind goes down in Cypress Hills, it's blowing in Moosomin, and you've got wind energy coming, sort of thing. Our system, it's maybe, and that would be probably another debate, but it's maybe a bit simpler to plan that because we are responsible for the whole chain. So getting that figured out for one transmission provider may be a bit simpler, maybe a bit easier to get going right now as well. So pros and cons, both ways.
Great. Denis?
Yeah, fortunately, we've done projects in both, and I have to kind of agree that Saskatchewan is, better set up for renewables because the pricing is set. I apologize, but that's it's also Alberta's in just an unfortunate, very low power price market, and it's very tough to justify any kind of project, let alone a renewables project. Mm-hmm. It's just the way that market is, a slight oversupply, and the prices are down. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like I said, the key, renewables is more like a capital play. It's almost like in real estate more than an operating plant because it's such a high capital investment up front and it's like an annuity or a long-term payout. You kind of need that security that you know what pricing you're going to get and you can build your financial model over that. Mm-hmm. In Alberta, the price is variable at the moment, and it makes it very tough. It's a much higher risk to take on at this time, anyways.
For sure.
Okay, I got to stick up for Alberta a little bit here. A little competition is fun. And that's right, and look what it does, the prices are very competitive, and, that's where the grid is at right now. That's what's happening with, gas and commodity prices and all those variables that go in there. And I'll say in our other jurisdictions, in the territories, we're held to a tight standard there, then where everything is scrutinized, and here's what the utilities are doing, here's what customers want to do. So there's very much that involvement and back and forth. So, they're very different systems. They do get their results. Just for information on the Alberta, the deregulated wholesale portion, the transmission and distribution. So there's cost of service for transmission, and then there's something called performance-based regulation. Then that is what is overseeing the distribution system there. So that's got certain metrics and indices that are tracked, and productivity factors there that are very good if you've got a math degree on figuring all of that out. And there's a lot of smart people behind it, and it's just a different regime in that respect as well.
For sure, good. So, I think that, the title of the symposium today is Renewable Energy in Remote and Indigenous Communities. And, I think that there are more costs when you are talking about working in northern and remote communities. And so can you talk a little bit about what are appropriate payback periods for those projects, and also just how should we be thinking about the non-economic benefits of some of these projects, and how do you think about that as business people in this world, in this space?
Maybe I'll start. One super interesting community, and Michael from Yukon College was talking about Old Crow, north of the Arctic Circle, and we fly diesel fuel in, and it is diesel units. And as we talked about earlier, the communities develop around the diesel units, and you become more aware of them and want to find alternatives and do things to reduce that. So Alaska, they're world trendsetters in wind diesel systems. Old Crow's got solar capacity that's in and increasing, and looking at flow batteries and storage to ultimately, on a sunny day, have the diesel units turned off, and just there in a backup mode. So they're running on the panels. Any other power shaping is done by the batteries. And that's all about reducing emissions, environmental sustainability, energy self-sufficiency for the community. And there is a community where the costs to get things in and out of there are very high. So you'd say the payback or whatever your hurdles are that you want to do it are going to be quicker. What's that time frame? It's from the solar, we like those projects. They call them the plug and plays as quicker than analyzing a year of wind data, and then the construction and the complexities then even of getting into remote communities, and the technologies and the operations and maintenance of them. So making sure that you have systems and your local people are involved in and trained in how to keep these up and running. So that's that high level of excitement on it, and there's the driver on cost savings. In that case in particular, and the comment was made this morning too, if you don't necessarily want to go and experiment, but I would say the Old Crow people and Jordan, your team, very receptive to trying new things. And we understand with innovation that there can be failures at the test level. I mean, when we install something that's going commercial and into service, it's reliable, it's safe, it's going to be there. But you need to walk and then learn how to run in some of the more challenging environments that we have.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I have to. Yeah, I agree with that completely. It's definitely more expensive to work up north with the transportation and just access. But that's part of the reason we really promote partnerships to engage that local community. A solar farm isn't technically that, it's like I said, a week's training, and they can be you can be a solar installer, not an electrician, but assembler of the panels, and we found that to be a very effective way to minimize our costs, to mobilize staff, pay LOA, and it engages the community really well. So that's one way to kind of counteract that. The power prices we see are much higher up north. We're seeing 30 to whatever 70 cents a kilowatt hour, and Alberta's 6-7, right? It's a big difference between the two. So you have to look for ways to try to get your installation costs down. And do that through, we believe, through partnerships is our way to do that.
Great.
Yep. I certainly agree with my colleagues on those points around the challenges, that sort of thing. Just in terms of the non-economic benefit, I think there's a big win there, and it's been kind of talked about today already, but skill development in those remote communities. So if let's say if it's wind, for example, it's one of the fastest growing forms of generation, so you're teaching somebody a skill that they can, put to work in their career in their local community, or if they want to leave, they can go somewhere else, and it's going to be largely the same sort of job. I think the connection provides a lot better connection to the rest of the province and to the other communities around. Some of the First Nations communities I'd never heard of until I got involved with this job, and then, okay, I know where those guys are, I know where those guys are. So it does, I think, bring a bit of a better sense of connection for First Nations as well. And to echo the comment, the partnership, the reaching out, building the partnerships kind of thing is a benefit for everybody that's involved.
Great, thanks. So we've talked a little bit today about, this kind of builds on that question, on the importance of economics. The project has to pay, but we've also talked a little bit about values and the importance of sort of a broader value proposition as well. So from each of your perspectives, what is the value proposition for you to engage as a company in this kind of work? Like, why is it, why? Why do you do it?
The IPP work, or it's a lot of fun. It's technically exciting. Meeting the people in the communities and finding out how they live, what's important to them, how can we help. If we can't, great. We just want to see where we can input. It's so exciting to have the knowledge sharing back and forth for what each of us can do, the traditional knowledge and the Western science, and we're seeing how rapidly the technologies are changing and able to then meet these specific needs. We do it because we're in for the long run. We're not, we like to build, own, operate, partner, and do that. We've done that for generations and still plan on doing that. I mean, that's the main reason we're there.
Yeah, and we love to do projects. The excitement to chase the project, to win the project together as a team, to implement that project. It's a challenge, but it's what we do is get the projects completed, and to see that project successful, and then we're on to the next one. So it's kind of the why we do it. It's and that engagement. You get to meet a lot of people during the process, and make a lot of learnings along the way.
I think for me, the biggest thing is just to be so involved with this real, I don't want to say revolution, but evolution in generation in the province and in the country. So I was on the coal side for about 15 years in one way or another, and I remember not that long ago, it was a real sense of pride for us that I think the one year, 64 or 62% of our energy that year came from coal. And now it's significantly less than that. So we're already been evolving a lot as far as moving to renewables and where our generation's coming from. So it's really, really exciting to be part of the, the move to renewables. It's incredibly exciting to talk to people from around the world and hear what their experiences have been, because some places are a lot further down the road than we are to find out what their learnings are. I just want to compliment the organizers of the conference today too, because it's amazing the depth of the speakers and some from different countries in Norway and places like that. I think that's really amazing, and it's just been great to hear your perspectives today and benefit from what you're doing.
Great, great. So, Denis, I would like to pick up just on something that you mentioned in your last response, because I'm kind of curious to hear from you. What makes a good partner for you? And it wouldn't be just for you, it would be for the rest of the panelists. But what is it that you look for when you go in to partner with another entity or someone that tells you, like, okay, I can tell that they're meeting sort of the minimum standards, or this is going to be good?
Well, it always starts with trust, right? You have to build that, and it's not something that just happens overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long-term relationship. It's something that it's meeting the people. It's getting to know the community, understand the values, and really try to integrate and really get to know, understand what's important to them, what's important to that community. And that's what we look for, to see if it matches our values of giving back and making it a better, better environment, better place for us all. So that's what we look for. We also look for a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. That's just something that I think somebody mentioned earlier today, that you need a community champion, and it's such an important thing. You need that champion in the community that's going to take that project, work with you, and see it through.
Mm-hmm.
So we look for that too, and a bit of an entrepreneurial interest, because projects can be difficult, and getting them going, seeing them through to the long run, it can be a challenge. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk to that one. Please,
I
Dwight.
agree, and it's so important to recognize the capabilities that each other has, because the complexity of getting projects done now, the level of involvement and intensity that is there, it takes a whole team to do that. The trust, the openness, the sharing, the learning from one another is that's the key for the sort of the full meal deal to put the puck in the net these days.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good. Tim, anything to add to that?
No, something we look for is the long term, right? So like the IPP partners that we're looking for, we want somebody that's in it for the long haul. Somebody that understands the importance of community in Saskatchewan, because it is very, very important. So somebody that wants to get in here and be a good neighbor and contribute, and again, help open the door for other IPP developers that will be coming in as well. So very, very important.
Sure. So I think I've got time to probably ask one more question to you all before we open it up to the audience to see what questions you all might have for this esteemed panel. So I think if we were to look back and think about IPP and the potential that it held, for a long time it was, oh, that could happen in the future, and now that future is here. All three of you have had really quite distinguished careers in energy. And I'm just wondering, what do you think, if you were to look down in the future 10, 20 years from now, what does the world look like, given just the rapidity of change that we've experienced, say, just in the last couple of years? Like, what does that look like? Because in many ways, where we are right now is sort of unimaginable if you just even think back 3 years. Where are we headed?
I think we're going to end up with one app on our phone that just does everything.
With the generator.
And building on. So it is very, there's all that infrastructure that is in place, and, the traditional model of necessarily large centralized generation, there's still a space for that. There's space for down to the microgens and your self-gen and inputting and outputting. control systems, energy monitoring, energy efficiency, guidance, and tools and things that you have, I think will all be very much more involved from a business and from a home and personal perspective in energy. And who really thought about it that much before, you know, and other than you look at your bill and go, oh, okay, I guess that's what I owe. You know, there's things that you can do. There's so many ways to get involved, from conservation, your demand side management and whatnot, and being a generator, that it's full spectrum, full scale. I think is the difference, and that trend has started.
That's a great question, which I knew what it was going to look like in 3 years, let alone 10 or 20. I had nowhere to invest my money. We've talked a lot about the IPP and competition, wind development, that sort of thing. Something that we're seeing a lot of, at least like people asking the question or beginning to ask the question and inquiring of us, is, how do I get involved with an inside the fence, outside the fence type of an arrangement where I'll generate my own energy, I'll sell you some. Or how do I get involved just to generate my own electricity? So industries looking at it going, if nothing else, I can hedge in my own cost of electricity going forward, because if I put in natural gas, I can predict what it will be, and 10 years from now, I'll have a pretty idea what my costs are going to be. So those sorts of things, we seem to be getting more of those sort of requests all the time. So people wanted to get involved for doing it themselves on an industrial level. We've talked a lot today about solar of different sizes, small-scale solar. When we're out doing open houses in the province, there's a tremendous interest in rooftop solar, small-scale solar, again, like something for the acreage or the cabin. Or I was just blown away by the interest and the knowledge that people have. Like they're so into it as far as how that's all going to work. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but there's certainly an opportunity for it to look very different in 10 or 15 years than it does now, for sure.
Great. Denis, we'll give you the chance to
Okay.
last word before we go to the audience to
I
see if the
feel
audience has
fortunate.
questions.
Yeah, I guess I see the power literacy increasing dramatically with everyone. Knowing how much power it takes to charge your car. I mean, I'm also predicting electric cars will eventually be a fairly like a major investment here. So people will, similar to filling, know how many liters your gas tank takes. They'll know how many kilowatts of energy. They'll know how many kilowatts of energy their fridge is taking. They'll know how much should they charge their car right now. Power prices are a bit high, but no, I'll discharge my car to the grid at peak time, and I'll charge it at night. So there'll be this whole other economy of there's so many batteries being produced right now. It's just I think there's a huge opportunity for storage to really become smart, and people to get smart with it. So I think that'll be a pretty big trend in the future.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Well, I think we can open it up to the audience to see if the audience has any questions for our esteemed panel. One of the great privileges of being at a university is the opportunity to bring people together like this. We get a chance to think about the big picture, and I can't think of many other places where we'd have a panel like this all at one time with an audience like this. So I just want to say thank you to all three of you for taking the time to be here today. Do we have anybody who would like to come up and pose a question for our audience? Wonderful. Is it on?
It's
There it
working
is.
now.
There we go.
All right, this is Mira Kohler, and I'm with Alaska Village Electric Co-op. Of course, I was a speaker earlier today. And I don't necessarily intend to throw rocks at IPPs, but I will throw a few little pebbles at you because that is my privilege. A fundamental difference between ourselves as a cooperative electric utility and yourselves as independent power producers is that you do it for a profit. You're all making good bucks sitting up there as representatives of the IPP. The challenge that we have is that there are no IPPs that are willing to come and talk to us about selling power to us or producing power for us because there is not enough profit in it for them. But I hear you say terms like net metering and carbon tax and things like that would encourage self-generation. In a small community of 400 people with 150 or 200 household services, basically, each individual that decides that they're going to generate their own power still rely upon the utility to provide their needs when they're not generating their own power. But they're not willing to pick up their share of the cost of that service that's being provided to them. That is a fundamental challenge that we have with the whole concept of net metering. I mean, we don't net meter, we don't allow net metering, but we will purchase power back at our avoided cost. So they're getting the avoided cost of fuel, which typically is 15, 20, 25 cents a kilowatt hour. So they're doing okay from that perspective, but they are being carried by the rest of their community members. So we have to figure out, you know, maybe a slightly different paradigm. There are benefits that the IPP industry brings to us. I look at Ethan, for example, at Siri. They're able to harvest programs such as the production tax credit, investment tax credits, and so forth issued by the federal government, which allows them actually to incur a lower capital cost than we can because we don't have those advantages. So a little bit more perhaps collaboration with us, potentially. We would be very interested to talk to you and see if there's something you can do for us. But it's not all roses, and I just wanted to point out that independent power producers aren't necessarily the solution for the future. You don't have an obligation to serve. You don't have the requirement to be there come hell or high water for our customers. We have to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback, and I've got a lot of respect for what you do as cooperatives in staying current and up to date on all of the health, safety, environmental things that it takes, and it's a long list, and kudos to your team for being able to do that. And I would like to talk. If we can help anywhere, that's what my job is, and that's what our team is interested in, is seeing where can we do things better together. You know, you've got capabilities that we don't. You've got your system and infrastructure, your people, your work processes, and then we have ours, and we can learn from each other on that. And I would say, you know, the business models have changed. You know, some of the return expectations are different. It's lean and mean. Everyone's trying to be as efficient, because if you're not going to be doing projects. The willingness to do things differently and not say, this is the way we've always done it in the past, so we're going to stay that way. We're not. We have to change. That was a great question. Where are we going to be in 15 years? I don't know, 15 months is, you know, things are accelerating. So it's exciting times, and I appreciate your comments, and I have a lot of respect for what you do on your system, and if we can help in any way, then ATCO would like to do that.
Yeah, fantastic. Several questions there, and there's no one answer. You know, and I think that's been really well said today. There's no one perfect answer, and just because you've seen one example of something, you haven't seen them all, and there's got to be a lot of solutions. But I just touch on the one thing that you mentioned there, and that's with these changes that are coming, and when people go into self-generation or microgrids or whatever the answer might be, is who pays for the rest of the system, right? Because if you know, particularly get big industrial customers going, you know, sort of self-generation, if that ends up happening, it leaves a fairly significant infrastructure that the ones that are still on the system are going to have to pay for it. And I certainly don't have an answer to, you know, my group and with the planning folks and others, we've tossed that around a lot, but it's not easily answered. You know, it's great if people can be sort of self-sufficient, or if they can get off grid with what they want to do, but everybody else still wants, you know, reasonable electricity in their home. So how do we make that happen? That's one of the challenges ahead for sure.
I mean, as I mentioned, we're more of a builder of projects, so we'll work for whoever. But we see that there might be potential for a community to be an IPP. I mean, in a grid-tied system. So that might be an interesting, an interesting model where a community actually has meets their own needs and has maybe on-site storage, and then now they have the opportunity to export that way too, and become an IPP. So maybe that's a potential, diversion of the model.
Excellent. Next question.
Is this on? Oh,
Yeah.
it's on. Where can I find a job building solar panels? That's the question.
Building or?
Is there available jobs for building solar panels? China?
Building, there's...
In Saskatchewan.
in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, on roofs.
I don't know of anybody that builds them. A lot of solar panels are built in Eastern Canada, like Canadian Solar is a major supplier of them. I'll get your information after, and if I can find something for
Sure.
you, I will.
Yep, that's all I ask. Thank you.
Just find me when we're done.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess one of our installation partners is Great Canadian Solar is their name, and they're hiring. So if I could pass that on to you as well.
Mayor Rick?
Good afternoon. Rick Richardson from Green Lake again. I appreciate the concept of independent power production and all that. However, we are talking about remote and Indigenous communities. We generally don't number in the many thousands as the South does, where I can see a practical application to, making a profit-oriented business out of power production. And in the North, our communities are also widely separated. And in the Aboriginal worldview, as I understand it, we have a different sense of what value is. We have a more holistic view, and therefore we look at many different factors other than just what's the bottom line, when do we make a profit. And in many of our communities, my own included, we have in excess of 70% unemployment rates. Now that's pretty serious, and in the South here it would be unacceptable. In the North it's common. We have issues around suicide. We have issues around many different things that are not generally thought of in the South as having value. Now, when we look at any way that we can mitigate any of those negative consequences of high levels of unemployment, of many generations of being excluded from the economy and from society in general, we look to ideas like this that actually fall under and meet a lot of the criteria of our traditional knowledge and experiences. And in our community, we look to the idea of traditional knowledge and values in a modern economy. And that's why this is one of the areas that we've looked at to do it. However, building the business model based on what would be basically a European structured system of modern economy, it wouldn't make sense to have a large corporation build a renewable energy project for a community of less than 500, nor would I be able to see any way that you'd be able to profit on that. And so I don't know, are you speaking about the potential of creating independent power production capacity and abilities for those remote and Indigenous communities that we're speaking of? Or is it something that's totally impractical? However, it's something that I know that the technologies exist already to integrate systems of power to accommodate for renewables and such like. I know, what was it, 42 years ago that Germany put the first solar panel on a house. And they've developed all of those capacities and technologies by now, I'm sure, because they've got a significant amount of renewable energy production over there. We would do well to learn from their model. However, how are you going to promote independent power production for those isolated and remote communities that we're here to speak about? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that insight and feedback and question. I think we heard this morning from the Finland perspective, and I think it's a basket of solutions or technologies depending on a community. So say there's a remote northern community, high unemployment, a rich wood reserves, forest capabilities, then that can be an economy to harvest and replant and grow and be sustainable, more self-sufficient and energy balanced in its own micro environment there. That's a possibility. And what I like about it is the balance, balancing the energy that community needs. Having other, of course, put some solar in with it and some energy storage, a wood economy. That's a renewable way that's quite good from a sort of labor perspective. And how would the IPP be involved? Well, helping with the technology, helping getting it into the community, helping learn how to operate and maintain it, and working together that way on it. So I was interested in the Finland perspective this morning, and I see that's an interesting model as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot of spin-off industries from just the power. As we heard, there was wind power going into heating wastewater and water facilities for heating. So you're right, there's small communities, but there's a lot of opportunities. We're working on 3 northern water plants for Gamidi, Wekwidi, and Polituk. And they've asked for, because anytime those plants go into the communities, it upsets their power grid because it's a new plant and it's a significant draw. So they've asked for a solar roof and a backup diesel genset. Their hope is they'll never have to turn the backup generator on, that they're going to have a solar backup for their water plants. So it's just another avenue of for us, we just do projects, and that just happens to be one of them that we're seeing renewables sneak into other areas. Renewables into water treatment. It's just another facet.
So for our part, we are working to try to understand how the technology would work together. One particular project that we're working on now has wind and battery, and we're looking at integrating solar so we can start to understand how those things might work best together and might provide some of the solutions. I think the group that Raman was working for a better part of a year, we're looking at some programming and how solar can be used in different ways and that sort of thing. So we are working on it. I think we've got a lot to learn from some of the organizations that were here today as far as what they have done and where we might go with that for sure.
Great. Thank you.
My name's Mitch Carlson with MCE Consulting. Just have a question about scale of IPP projects and maybe what your perspectives are on preferences. So whether it's a multi-megawatt one or down to maybe smaller scale, and interested in perspectives about maybe solar or wind farms at the large, maybe a 5 megawatt versus multiple or mass installations of rooftop solar, so the same equivalency but through 1,000 or so installations in a community. Just wondering how that impacts a business model for you and what maybe preferences you have from one versus the other.
So just sort of set the context for where we're going with solar. So we've got 60 megawatts utility solar that we're looking at sort of in the short term. They will all be utility scale, either through FNPA or community projects or the competitions that we're doing. In terms of larger scale projects, the competitions we're doing right now are for the 10. So what we're going to do is, just like we did with wind a number of years ago, get it introduced to our system, start to learn how it reacts, how it works with our system, and then see where we go with solar in the future. If it, costs come down, if it plays a bigger role, if we would consider bigger projects at the time. We've had a group, as I mentioned, that Raman's been on for a while, looking at community solar, looking at a number of different avenues for community solar. and their results of their work is still, in the governance process and will be announced, sort of thing. So what the plan is going to look like for that, I'm anxious to find out as well. But we definitely understand the opportunity that's there for community solar, and certainly the demand that's there for it.
Yeah, I guess community solar is would be new community. I guess any type of renewable new to the area, but there is a viable size of project before there's enough revenue to hire somebody to actually have an employee of the entity. So I think anything under a megawatt is going to be a tough business model. Like the 100 kilowatt current program is really just cost, energy savings. It's not to build a business around. It'd be very, very difficult. I think, if that'd probably be kind of a cutoff, I think, but I could be wrong, depending on the price of power, but for the local market.
I guess from the scale that we're looking at, large-scale farms and down to individual homes and businesses, so municipal buildings, recreation centers, that scale is happening right now. So we've got experience at that size. On the larger farms, maybe divide it up, say what would hook in at the distribution system level, say rough 25 megawatt farm. We start getting bigger than that, then you're typically getting into transmission line interconnections and then a higher cost regime of the substation and interconnection costs related to that. So those are the big ones, and you need some bigger pieces of land, obviously, but everything I would say from large farms down to your individual home are on our menu.
Great. Last question.
Jordan Peterson with the Gwich'in Tribal Council out of the Nunavut Northwest Territories. 2 questions. The first one is, what cultural changes do you think that the organizations that you represent, that you need to make to strengthen a relationship with Indigenous communities? And in terms of power purchase agreements, what changes in policy do you think need to be made to make that more feasible for small projects to happen in terms of selling excess energy back to an IPP or a public utility? And what role do you think you play lobbying government to change not only legislation but policy within the government structure to make these projects more feasible?
Okay. Thanks for those questions, Jordan. And what would need to change culturally? Maintaining the communications and making sure that we're getting the best out of all of the relationships that we have, to leverage that, to strengthen new ones, make sure each other knows what the opportunities and challenges are, and work together on them. We take a lot of pride in doing that. We respect what your team does in Yukon and elsewhere. I think from the easiest policy way, I mean, technically from a project, the easiest thing is if it's balanced, and it's sustaining and meeting its own energy requirements. That's the easiest thing. If it's under and it's pulling some power in, then there's the rates that go with that. And then where it gets different is when it's pushing power out, and different jurisdictions are doing different things. And I think that's just all got to be modeled properly so that it's all correctly compensating both, all the parties that are involved in. Like Tim had mentioned, the backup that the system has to have in place for when it's not generation coming out and when it's got the backup power, that all that is recognized. So there is that complexity into it, and it is very jurisdictional from that perspective. What was the third piece? Yeah, and that, so at territorial and provincial levels, then that is a lot of dialogue and door knocking, campaigning from the power producer's perspective to make sure that government understands what the needs are, what the drivers are, and what the opportunities are. I mean, governments change, but a lot of the, at the working level and the bureaucratic level are a constant, so there's a good base understanding, but making sure the new leaders are aware of what the challenges are, but what those opportunities are, and that's at the federal level as well. So it means a lot of traveling, it means a lot of meetings, and it's all good. And just that education for each other to make sure that whatever is being contemplated and structured and put into place is actually a workable plan.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and also, just that thinking long-term. When we've done projects in the communities, you have to think long-term, because they think long-term. There's only one First Nation, but there's lots of EPC companies like us. So that's the key thing for us, is to have that respect that there's only one community like that. And I guess the other part is to put a high value in that local knowledge, like that local. They know that area better than anybody, so put a lot of high value into that, and that seems to help our projects go very successful.
I agree with my colleagues on the panel. I don't think I have a lot to add there. As far as encouraging opportunities, there's so much to be said for the engagement work, getting to know each other. Like, we've talked a lot today about the uniqueness of different communities and different opportunities, that sort of thing. So, like, my group is involved with several First Nations right now, trying to understand what their opportunities might be, trying to understand what they would like to bring to the table, and vice versa. Like, SaskPower's got its stakeholders, and we explain this is what we're looking at right now as far as our business environment, and just encourage the understanding of what each other is looking for and looking at in terms of business and that sort of thing. You can never have too much communication, right? It's about engagement and working together to find solutions.
Good. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our panel. If you all could help join me, thank our panelists. Thank you very much, Tim, Denis, and Dwight, for being with us today and coming here and sharing your knowledge with us. We greatly appreciate it. And I'll turn it back over to Gary at this stage. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Toddi, for your excellent job here. And that was actually a very interesting discussion, and it's one that I've had some good debate on with colleagues over the years, being involved in various Indigenous business developments. And in some ways, Indigenous communities look at business opportunities perhaps in a little different way. And I think that came through here. Whether it's when we look at opportunities in our communities, sometimes the default is take a narrow view. It's just a project. This is it. That's going to be point A to point B. Job is done. X money is spent, and so on. And I think what we've seen in our communities over the years is, if I can see that opportunity, I can leverage maybe something for food security, because if I can stabilize the energy stability in my community and reliability in this environment of food security challenges as a country in Canada, maybe I can do a greenhouse because then I got some extra energy. Maybe that technician that I can train to work part-time in that renewable energy field could be a water technician, because in this day and age, water quality and safety in Indigenous communities is a challenge. And so on and so forth. And then the returns and the impacts on employment and training, and small medium enterprises are the backbone of our economy. And I looked even at my own community at Pelican Arrows within the Peter Ballantine Cree Nation, 3,000 people. You got to leave town to get a haircut, get a tax prep done, and so we tend to look at projects such as these, whether it's in renewable energy or others, and we take this perspective that's a little broader. to see how best we can incent and support other initiatives to happen. And I think this is where cooperatives have had a huge impact, and they fit some of the world views, but it's not exclusive. There's also room for IPP and other, but it's having that conversation and figuring out how best to align those values, get that value proposition just right, the business case just right, overcoming the technological challenges and leveraging other opportunities. So that was a very interesting discussion. I'd like to call up at the end of the day here, Greg Pelzer, who was going to come and provide some closing remarks and pass on some thank yous on all of us. So, Greg, I can't do a better job of introducing you than you introducing yourself. So, just tell us what you do.
Howdy. I want to thank everyone here. And if you think back to where this conversation would have been about renewable energy even 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago, how much the world has changed. And we have an incredible opportunity. And to me, what was so exciting, the themes about partnership, and the themes about trust, the themes about value proposition, and this big change that we're all engaged in. We do have an opportunity to do something profoundly transformative in Canada, in other places around the circumpolar north. And what was amazing, it didn't matter what sector people came from, whether it's the Crown Utilities, whether it's IPPs, whether it's Indigenous organizations, whether it's cooperatives, whether it's academic. Many of us could have stole the lines from each other's papers and presentations as we went forward. And this is really important. And right now, it's do we have the spirit, and I think we do, to take that risk to trust, to move together, to move forward. And I thought today's discussions were incredibly powerful and inspiring and informative. What I want to do is extend a thank you to folks. So as a faculty member here at the University of Saskatchewan School of Environment, we've got a lot of folks that made this whole thing possible. One I want to start with is a thank you to our steering committee members, Susan Bloom from Sask Polytechnic, to our good colleague and friend, Gary Marasti, to Mike Marsh. He'd get several thank yous on our steering committee, but who saw the value in going down this pathway, this initiative, and I can't thank you enough. A huge thank you to Elder Phil Moran. Phil has been a friend to many of us over years, whether through negotiations and so on, and to step up, especially with the challenges that Peter Valentine Cree Nation is going through right now with the forest fires and evacuees, is deeply felt. Thank you, Gary, for emceeing today. I think everyone would agree you did a hell of a good job. I want to say thank you for that. In Team Saskatchewan, we had folks like the MLA, it was the executive or the legislative secretary for SaskPower stepping in the last minute. Some of you know in Saskatchewan are going through a leadership race in both parties, and getting folks at this time was provided a challenge, but it shows that commitment on all sides to step up. To Irina Creed, our new executive director coming in here, a huge thank you. And to Toddi, a dear friend and colleague to us for seeing us through to this stage. We wouldn't have been here without you, Toddi. It's that simple. To our panelists and to our moderators, a huge thank you. Like the willingness just to put yourself out there to share was enormously helpful to all of us. We got to say a huge thank you to the U.S. Consulate based in Alberta for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories, who made it possible for the folks for Alaska to come down and join us. Social Science and Humanities Research Council, who helped fund this event as well. And to repeat, a big thank you to SaskPower, who is doing a lot to foot the bill to make this initiative absolutely possible. Stay tuned over the next week, or this week coming up. There's more events. The Alaskans are graciously coming up to share the story. up in Yellowknife, and then we're meeting with folks out in Calgary as well. They're hosting us out there to keep the information going and keep the projects going. And I know a number of people are going to be working on research projects and grant writing. To pull this, I affectionately call this Coalition of the Willing for Renewable Energy. And there are a lot of willing kindred spirits in this room. And I want to thank you all and thank everyone for coming. Have a great night.